Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the Eon Podcast again. Unfortunately, I failed to record the earlier part of this conversation because I didn't get enough sleep last night. And Brother Imran has been very patient. We're joined by Imran Hussein, not the one you're thinking of, but the one that I'm thinking of and that I've been thinking about for a while since I saw you on Blogging Theology, which is where we primarily get our cues from, Blogging Theology and the Thinking Muslim, at least for our English podcast. Brother Imran
Mashallah.
is a master's in Islamic, is about to complete his master's in Islamic studies, and is a current member of the Sapiens Institute. And he wrote a book that you can get online, and we can add the thing here, inshallah. Is called very provocatively "Dying to Believe," which addresses the issues of modernity that face us all. In fact, not just people in the West. Considering that you're a first generation, mashallah, Pakistani British individual. Brother Imran, welcome to the podcast.
Jazakallah khair, bro. May Allah bless you. This feels like deja vu. It's like this has happened before at some time. Allah Akbar. May Allah bless you, bro.
Yeah,
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah for having me on, bro.
we're having our own very own Groundhog Day. Brother Imran, we were talking about, just to get people just up to speed with what they've missed because of me. We were addressing and talking about the issue of modernity and how post-modernity took it to the next level, where even the ethics, like you said, the ethics and the moral codes that were left over from that Christian tradition that were being carried forward in modernity to some extent, which left some semblance of a, like a social cohesion in Western society. That too has been taken away from them. And like you mentioned, that moral goalposts are constantly being shifted. What is abhorrent now will be acceptable and if not mandatory in 5, 10, 20 years. And in this scenario, how have you seen Western society cope with that? And how do you see Muslims in particular coping with that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting sort of, when you look at the history of it, it's very interesting. You had the Renaissance, you had the Scientific Revolution, and then you had the Enlightenment. These were sort of key milestones in history, where there was a great shift in thought and human psychology. So and now we're at the age where some academics will say it's a meta-modern age. So it's a combination of modernism and postmodernism, an amalgamation of the two. How has society coped with it? I think, look, let's be honest, and you mentioned this point, which is very valid, which is that there has been some good that's come out of modernity as well, the post after the Enlightenment. No doubt, they focused on rationalism, they focused on empiricism, and, it resulted in some amazing good as well, that came out with technology, science, etc. Brilliant things. And by the way, this, many times credit isn't given to the Muslim world for this. I mean, if you look at the Islamic history, especially from the 11th to the 14th, 15th centuries, you see that Islam was what they refer to as the golden age. Muslims were pioneers. They were leading in these fields, in the sciences, mathematics, etc. They were translating the works of the Greeks and the ancient world, not only translating it, but also building on top of that knowledge. So they weren't only reading it and studying it, they were building on top of it. Many thinkers from the West were going over to the Islamic world, learning the Arabic language to access this knowledge. And this is what Iqbal, mentions in his work, that the modern phenomenon, the progress that we see in the West from a scientific perspective is a part of the Muslim heritage, because Muslims laid the groundwork for this. The Westerners came, they took it, they benefited from this, and they took it back to the West. So how they've coped, in some ways, they've done really well. There's been some brilliant things that have come out of it. But in other ways, they haven't done so well. And those other ways, I believe, are some of the most fundamental things and the most necessary things for human beings, such as our ultimate meaning of life. That's essential for the human being. If the human being doesn't know what the ultimate meaning of life is, he can't function. It's hard to function without meaning in this life. Morality and ethics. If you don't have an anchor, an objective anchor for objective moral values and duties, then it's hard to function because it's all subjective. It's just my views against another person's views, or my group's views against another group's views. Identity is another thing. Who are we? What are we as human beings? What is the human being? If you look at it from a purely sort of secular, godless, modernist perspective, ask them the question, what is the human being? The best they can say on a good day, if they're being generous, they'll say you're an intelligent animal. That's all you are. And if you come across someone that's more of a reductionist, a naturalist, he will say you're just a compilation of atoms and molecules. That's all you are, right? So, I mean, it leaves the doors open. Okay, you're an intelligent animal that has come into existence for no reason, by accident. You have no ultimate purpose or meaning behind your life. Ethics and morals are all subjective. Now, if you give a individual or a person this perspective or this outlook or this paradigm, now you can see how easily from that vantage point, one or two things is going to happen. Either they're going to fall into nihilism, right? There's no meaning behind anything. Forget about it, right? Or they're going to go down the route of existentialism. And this is why the existentialist philosophers became very popular, because they were filling a void, a gap, a hole in people. And they talked about these existential realities, the meaning of life, ethics and morality, etc. You're going to go down that route, and you're going to therefore create your own meaning and purpose to your life. Or you're going to go down the route of which most people are going down today, this postmodern age, which is a type of hedonism, which is, no, everything's subjective. Just do what you want, enjoy yourself, have fun, as long as you don't harm other people. You know, that's it. That's what the meaning of life is. Just do whatever you want. But again, they're just making this stuff up. Where are they getting this from? You know, so that is a fundamental crisis of humanity. Those 3 or 4 things I've outlined. Any worldview, any ideology, any paradigm that denies Allah, that denies God and revelation, cannot answer those fundamental questions, right? You have no answers. All you're left with is you are an accident that is a product of another accident, which is the entire universe and the entire cosmos, and you're here for no reason. So you can do one of 2 things. Either just admit and say there is no meaning behind anything, nihilism, or then go and create your own meaning, a type of existentialism. So these are fundamental issues, bro, because if we look at the history of civilizations, if you look at the decline of civilizations, and these patterns academics have noticed, the common trend that always emerges is there's always a moral decay within a civilization, and they lose their way, they turn towards hedonism or worldly pleasures, and that's when civilizations decline. Now, therefore, this puts the modern Western civilization in a very delicate position from this perspective, because we're seeing the decay, the moral and ethical decay in society today. We're seeing that people don't know what their meaning is. We're seeing that people don't know what their identity is, who they are, what they are, and therefore they're defining themselves as anything they want, literally. Like you have kids in certain places saying, I want to be a table, I want to be a chair. I associate myself with these things, inanimate objects now. Like, where are people going to go, you know? So that is a big problem. And you mentioned Muslims, just to quickly touch upon this as well. Where does it leave the Muslims? Unfortunately, sometimes we think that we're safe. You know, we have Islam, everything makes sense, everything. And yes, Islam answers all the questions, no doubt. All of the crises I've outlined, Islam has the answers to every single one of those. And Allah gives us this. And this is why I'm trying to present or highlight to people that Islam, you have to start seeing Islam as a worldview, along with it being a deen. It's a way of life, we say, but it's a comprehensive worldview. It's a system which answers all those fundamental questions that we ask as human beings. Islam answers those questions, but unfortunately in society today, what we're seeing amongst the young Muslims is that they don't realize this. And what they're doing is they say, yeah, I believe in Allah. Yeah, I'm Muslim. But when they're living, the way they're conducting their lives is no different than an atheist or a secularist or a liberal is living these days. And therefore, they fall into the same issues and problems those people have, right? So this is another issue maybe we can unpack as we go along. But hopefully that addresses that question.
No, inshallah, we'll unpack it. There's just 2 criticisms that come to mind. One is that when you said that, and Iqbal points to this, and a lot of authors and intellectuals have pointed to this, that Islam is a contributing factor to the sort of modernity that we ended up with, the sort of technological development. And don't you think there's a bit of a catch-22 when you lay claim to that technological or innovative heritage, you also lay claim to the moral degeneracies linked to modernity, in the sense of, was this not the natural progression for Islamic civilization as well, inevitably, had we remained in that central seat of power? Because at the end of the day, it is about, because there is a very close link with modernity and exploitation and colonialism. And Islam was turning into a sort of colonial entity, maybe not at the scale of the European colonial powers, but a similar sort of, beast was being created. Would this also have been our logical end, or is there something, are there trappings within Western civilization or Christianity that are unique to them that led to this outcome? And the other criticism would be, is the existentialism of finding meaning what's wrong with that? I mean, if people were to define a purpose purely from, and this is outside of the framework of, let's say, a religion like Islam, what's really all that bad for people to try and seek out purpose, considering the kind of technological help that we have nowadays in the way we can organize resources and conduct our lives? Maybe we don't have to think as tribal or feudal societies had to back in the day.
Okay, so in regards to the first point, we know that the Muslim civilization, in a way, did decline at a point in history, recent history, right? Now, you can put that down to many different things. A type of hedonism crept into the Muslim societies, wealth, money, luxuries, etc. Those played a big role as well. But I think what's very interesting, that if you look at the Islamic golden age, generally speaking, is that there was a combination of two things going on. When you study Islam and you read the Quran, you see that there's an encouragement. Allah encourages us to study the physical world, right? And again, going back to referring to Iqbal, this is why he very strongly in his reconstruction emphasizes that, the Quran is anti-classical and it's more empirical, according to him. And I think there's some truth to this, because when you read the Quran, you see that Allah constantly tells us to study the universe. Have you not seen the camel and how it was created? Do you not see the sun, the moon, the stars? But there's an objective behind it. It's not, the ends isn't, according to Islam, to just study these things for the sake of studying these things, or to develop these things for the sake of developing these things. The ends is that you reflect upon these things, you study these things, because there are signs behind these things that point you back towards Allah and His worship, which is our ultimate purpose, which is to know Allah and to worship Him. So these are means, these are tools that Allah has placed for the intelligent human being that He has created with an aql, that he can employ these tools to study the physical universe, to do the science, what we call science today, because in it are signs that lead one back to his creator. So that was the ultimate objective. Even if you look at some of the modernist thinkers, non-Muslim in the West, they say in their own works, they started to do science because they believed in God. And because they believed in God, they believed that there were patterns and order within the universe that they can observe, which is the case. You have the laws of physics, different laws that govern the universe, the constants and quantities, as scientists refer to them. So the point is that there was a higher objective behind doing the science and studying the world. Secondly, it became a mode of worship for people, because, anything could be a form of worship as long as you do it with the right intention. So to have the intention of doing science, developing medicine, for example, pioneering something in that will help humanity, and I'm doing this because Allah created me, and I'm doing this to please Allah, that becomes a mode of worship. So there's a higher ethical goal, if you like, and a framework within which the Muslims did science. However, if you look at science without God, yes, definitely. Now you have a big problem, because the ethics and morals are subjective. As we said, they go out the window. You can determine them. You can define them. Power governs society. It's all about power and wealth. And those are the end goals now for people. So science and technology becomes a means for that. And we see how people exploit these things these days, right? We see in the after the Enlightenment, the wars that took place, how technology was exploited. Bombs were dropped, atomic bombs, etc. So much devastation. Even today, bro, if you look at the whole domain of AI, and I've spoken to some of the guys, Muslims in AI, and one of the conundrums that they're facing right now is this whole ethical discussion. How far to push it. Where is it safe? And some of these guys in AI are quite eccentric as well. They're not the sort of neurotypical people. They're just quite weird in some ways. So it's even scarier, because they may have their own sort of definitions of what right is and wrong is and how far they should go. And they have their whole fantasies of when they're growing up and reading these comics about Terminator robots taking over, and some of these things that they're pushing. So they're quite wacky in that way. So, but the question remains now. We've seen the devastation that technology and progress in that regards can have if there's no ethical grounding and moral grounding. And if it carries on this way, only Allah knows best where it's going to go, but it's not looking good.
Right. And in that you answered both questions about how the Muslim age of inquiry was grounded by the Quran's demand for these signs to be studied as a means and mode of worship, as opposed to an aimless pursuit of comfort or leisure or development or progress, or for any of those. Those are all wonderful byproducts, but not the main goal. And the other element is that the trappings of modernity and post-modernity, or meta-modernity as you call it, is really fascinating. I'm going to steal that from you, by the way. Is that the problem with trying to find your own meaning is, and I think the AI example illustrates that very well, that You have people who aren't neurotypical and they're at the leading, front of these kinds of fields, and they're pushing morality forward without even, the consultation of the mass public at large. Simply by the means of executing these technologies, they are able to, superimpose meaning from them through these technologies on the mass public. So the illusion of an individual pursuit of meaning is really at best an illusion. So that lack of metaphysical grounding on a collective scale, when broken down to individualism, actually just means, again, a collective, worldview just coming from different sources that are not, religiously or metaphysically grounded. It's just stronger, better performing individuals, right? I think that's a very Nietzschean sort of idea that at the end, it's just people who outperform each other, that they get to determine what is the sort of the worldview of the moment or the hour.
Yeah.
In one of these crises, in one of the phases of this crisis, we saw the New Age religion come up in the 60s and 70s, where good living, psychedelics, and free love, and the pursuit of the arts and the pursuit of the self, the body as a temple, that whole culture, which still exists in pop culture, in consumption, whether it's media or products, that whole me generation thing, which I think lasted up until the 90s and 2000s. That phenomenon has somehow linked itself to one of your subjects, which you're very well versed in, is the UFO phenomenology. That whole New Age religion, I think the one of the biggest sort of byproducts of the New Age religion, Joe Rogan, who has his finger on the cultural pulse, who is like this amalgamation of healthy living and psychedelic drugs and the pursuit of the arts like stand-up and music and the physical arts like sports and kickboxing. So he's this sort of amalgamation of that whole movement of New Age religion, of alternative spirituality. And you see that the culmination of that, which is finding purpose outside of ourselves in the universe other than God. Yani, the idea of aliens will always be a sort of like a replacement or filling a God-shaped hole in our hearts, because, the signs of life outside of Earth always then suggests, it opens up a whole can of worms with regards to what is reality. What do you think the UFO phenomenology is really? Like, how do you break it down really in this context?
Again, very loaded question, bro. Lots of things that could be said in regards to this, but I really like the way you summed up, the age where, this new age or new religion, because I think that's very important in the dawah to highlight now. We've moved beyond the age of, hardcore classical naturalism or Richard Dawkins. It's finished now. No one's interested in that type of atheism or naturalism. Now we're moving to this new age where it's like a pick and mix of different ideas and views. The way I see it as well, it's like the hippies are returning. The hippies of the 70s, it's a comeback, basically. They had this idea of space brothers back then. They would smoke, do their psychedelics and try to make contact with their space brothers. We see that today. So you're absolutely right. Joe Rogan is a very good example. He's almost an archetype for, this sort of new age spirituality that we're talking about. It's a mix and mash of different things, your own morality, your own ethics, your own way of looking at reality. You're creating your own meaning and purpose, doing psychedelics, trying to have spiritual experiences in the absence of religion and God. Sam Harris actually was clever. Amongst the four horsemen of the four atheist horsemen, as they were referred to, Harris was probably the only one that realized that this shift is taking place. So he shifted gears. He went from his atheism towards this type of Buddhist spirituality that he started to integrate with atheism. But we've moved on beyond that as well now. And I think it's very interesting. Sorry, I forgot the question you asked, bro. What was the question that you asked?
The question I asked is how the apex of this in seeking out higher meaning.
In the UFO phenomenon.
Because one of my friends, really good friends here, we have, this sort of desi sort of gupshup all the time about this stuff, because we're sort of at the receiving end, at the lowest rung, right? And in the global south or the third world or whatever. It always goes back to how the divine presence is felt. Like any higher meaning that is being seeked out on an individual level, it's always going to bypass God and religion. And the apex of that is always aliens. Because that's the big, like, what's out there. It's aliens, it's UFOs. So how do you see this shaping up? Because it's a big part of how people view the world is aliens and their potential relationship with our governments and our people.
Yeah. So okay. So we can break this down into a few ways. You can look at this this topic from the perspective of the government and what the government is putting out currently. You can also look at it from an anthropological, social perspective as to what's going on because of this topic. Now, there's a professor called D.W. Pasulka, and she's written 2 books on this topic. She's a religious studies professor. And one of the conclusions she's coming to is that we're seeing the manifestation or an introduction of a new religion. It is a new form of religion, a techno-secular religion. So it's for the techno-secular mind, a secular mind that doesn't believe in God, doesn't want to worship God or believe in God, yet wants to have spirituality and yet wants to believe in something higher. So when you look at the way some people on the ground are seeing this topic, people that follow this, is that the language they're using is very interesting. These are beings that are more intelligent than us. These are beings that are looking out for us. They have our best interest at heart. These are beings that have something. They want us to save the planet. They want us to take care of humanity. They want us to stop the wars. All of these ideas that are coming out. Some of these, she even mentions in one of her books that some of these places where these apparent sources crashed. For example, Roswell is a very good example of this. People go to these sites as if they are going to a religious pilgrimage. They go to these sites, they have moments of awe and this amazing experience. They look for something to take back with them, pieces of metal, what may be left over, which wasn't cleared up, whatever the case is. Some people, for example, there's this guy who has a whole movement now where he takes people out into the desert in America and they do these rituals, right, to call these beings. I think it's called the CE5 movement, where if you look at, they don't publish much of the rituals, but I saw a clip of it, and they were playing old Hindu rituals, ceremonies, like, chants, and then they call these beings, and then they start seeing lights in the sky and stuff, and they have this experience. So there's definitely a religious element to this. Even the professor herself, D.W. Pasulka, she was on a podcast a little while back, and she opened up that she started to have these experiences. She started to see things and experience things. And that she started to change certain things about her lifestyle. So she became I don't know if she did or the host did, but one of them mentioned that when they started having these experiences, they adopted a vegetarian lifestyle. They stopped drinking. They started to cleanse themselves so they could receive these signals better. And these are academics we're talking about, right? So you see, there's definitely that innate desire to worship something higher and to connect with something higher, but not God, is manifesting in one way is this whole re-entry or re-emergence of the UFO phenomenon. And
yeah, never God. That's the trick with this. And like you mentioned, that there's a religious framework around it. There's pilgrimage, there is awe, there is worship, there are moments of weeping and catharsis and crying. If you remember the X-Files, the tagline used to be, "The truth is out there." The truth. It's very funny that it's called the truth, which is any higher truth but God. Anything but God. And you see this, and I think an analogous, worldview is the simulation theory guys, the AI tech guys. It's very similar to the UFO phenomenology, that anything but God, and he is a superior intellect, a tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 civilization. If anyone knows about the tier systems in spacefaring civilizations that they've made up completely, by the way. That there's a higher civilization simulating our reality. It's always, and the way, and they reverse engineer it from video games, for example, that if we're simulating realities, then are we being simulated in this world? And subhanAllah, they'll reference all kinds of pop culture and literature and music, but never God, never mainstream, revealed Abrahamic faith, religion. And you referred to alternative spiritualities, where the New Age element plays into, where they're playing old Hindu hymns and Buddhist chants and mantras, and it's a pick and mix of Eastern spirituality, which is a sort of rebelliousness to Christianity or conventional sort of religious wisdom. But the fascinating part is that leaking into Christian dialogue and discourse, where you have more peripheral Christians like Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson also, and I'm calling them peripheral Christians. They're not real theologically grounded, traditional Orthodox Christians, they are also pushing into this sort of this almost state narrative about how the aliens want what's best for us, and the phenomenology always shows up around the nuclear sites, for example, like you mentioned, that the aliens want what's good for us. One of the arguments they make is that that the UFO phenomenology went up when we started testing the nuclear weapons and we fired off the nuclear weapons. That they're here to stop the monkeys from, setting fire to the planet. It's always that framework of where monkeys that are trying to ascend, and they're these higher beings trying to descend and, and help us, achieve. And then the whole spectrum goes crazy all the way to the panspermia type idea, where that we've been inseminated onto the planet and our genes have been edited to. So all of these aliens and all of these foreign entities play a godlike role, but never God. They're never God. There can be a collective, a civilization, a higher intelligence. They're never just God. Do you think that self-aware, that there is such a lack in Western civilization, a self-awareness of figuring that out, or have Christians started to point that out in Western civilization?
Sorry, what of Christians specifically?
This lack of self-awareness that is in Western civilization, that they're really resisting God, basically. Have Christians figured that out about their fellow, Westerners, or have they not caught on to it yet?
Not really. I think Christianity is a dying religion in the West, bro. There's no interest. The churches are abandoned and empty.
That's very sad.
Yes, there's some revival you see online on social media, that there's some people that are turning back to Christianity, some famous people. But on the ground, bro, there's not much interest in Christianity, as per se, but more so this New Age type of religion. However, if you look at Peterson, for example, Jordan Peterson, one of the reasons he became famous was because he basically repackaged existentialism for the modern person, and with a little bit of a Christian flavor. It's perplexing that this guy is an academic, and when he's asked the question, does he believe in God or is he a Christian, he can't answer it in a straight way. It's like he's playing the game, he's towing the line because he doesn't want to fall into one camp or the other. It may dent his popularity. I don't think Christianity has much of a role on the ground, at least, but there's definitely an emergence of existentialism, ideas of existentialism mixed in with this whole New Age spirituality, with the whole UFO culture growing now, especially since the government is paying so much more attention to this topic now, and taking it seriously. It's like people are now readily accepting it. They were like almost hiding in the closet, waiting to come out. The government's given, them the permission now. Okay, you can. And you see there's thousands of people. Some of the congressional hearings that have taken place on the UFO topic have been the most popular congressional hearings. The podcasts on Rogan and other platforms that have covered the UFO topic are the most popular podcasts. It just shows the level of interest in this topic. And I really believe one of the reasons is this desire within the sort of human being that's void of God to look for something higher and connect with something higher, but not God, like you mentioned. It can't be God. They just don't like the idea. And there's reasons for that, bro. One is, like I said, after man played God, that you are your own creator, you create your own reality, you determine what's right and wrong, you determine your goals in life. When you start playing God and you taste that, it's very hard to go back from that and say, okay, now I'm going to submit to something else other than myself, a higher being, and follow organized religion. They don't like that idea, but they're willing to submit to these beings, these aliens, so-called aliens, and to what they're saying. It's strange, it's very strange.
That's a really fascinating and slightly depressing take, because one would expect that, the Christians, being our brothers in faith in a sense, and being people of the book, that they would have some pushback to this. But you're right, maybe 200 years of socialization is, it's the genie's out of the bottle. You can't, because I think that sort of individual, like my will be done is a very post-death, in our worldview, it's a Jannah phenomenon, right? When you're in Jannah, you can do as you will, and, you're not subject to any laws or whatever, and, have a go at it. But that sort of phenomenon here, it leads to a hedonism where you can't go back from it, where if you're allowed to do whatever you want and pursue whatever you want, now you don't want to bow down to a religion or a god or rules, and the phenomenon has become so extreme, like you mentioned, that the state has picked up on it, and something that they might have kept hush hush back in the day. Now they're openly talking about it, and they're talking about contact with light beings and UFOs and alien entities. You had Commander Fravor, a U.S. Navy pilot, in the Senate hearings on the Joe Rogan podcast. Bob Lazar, who I read about in like a book when I was a child. It was a book it was a compendium of cryptozoology. One of those like spooky books about the Loch Ness Monster or whatever. And subhanAllah,
you must have had an interesting childhood, bro. You're reading those books as a kid, man.
No, just at the library, when you go to the library and you read monster books or whatever. So I read one of those books. It was like a monster book, and it had a compendium. It was for kids. It had a compendium of like monsters that people think exist. And it was very forward with the idea that cryptozoology is like nonsense, it's bakwas. But there was a chapter on aliens, and I remember because English isn't my first language, I used to call him Bob Laser in my head. I thought, and then I forgot all about him for decades. And then he shows up, Bob Laser, on the Joe Rogan podcast.
3 years later, he comes back.
Decades later, I'm like, oh my God, it's Bob Laser. And then that's the first time I found out his name was Lazar. So
Laser is a bit more, I think, penetrating as a name to remember. Bob Laser is much better.
Yeah, that's why I think it made a home in my subconscious somewhere. Like somebody's called Bob Laser. So this phenomenon, why do you think? Which is the knee jerk is it's a psyop. It's a government psyop. It's drones. It's light shows. It's this, that, or the other. It's advanced aerospace technology that they're going to reveal to us, like the stealth bomber that they made in the 60s and then didn't reveal up until the 90s or something. What do you think, as somebody who's studying this, and maybe not as extensively as some of our more schizophrenic brothers and sisters might have, but someone who's approaching this academically, what do you think is the government trying to do? Is it trying to lean into this new kind of spirituality to ground their population?
So here's my take on it. If you look at it purely from the perspective of the government, right, then I agree. I mean, the first idea that comes to head is probably a psyop, because we know the governments have lied. It's the nature of governments, of politics, right? But what I did was I looked at it from many different perspectives. I looked at it from a religious perspective, and an anthropological perspective, and a historical perspective as well. Now, when you bring all of these different disciplines and you look at this phenomenon through the lenses of these different disciplines, you see it's far bigger than what the American government is saying or what they're filming over Iraq, as far as these objects that are flying through. It's far greater than that. I mean, there's an academic called Jacques Vallée. Now, if you look within ufology, this guy is the godhead. He's the one that they refer to. He's the big gun, basically, right? He's been studying this for probably more than 4 decades. He was the guy that was working on the early internet when it was first being developed. So he knows his stuff. And his conclusion is that this phenomenon is not extraterrestrial, meaning it's not aliens from another planet. Now, he's written this and he's covered this in his books. He's done it in some papers as well. And he has many arguments as to why he believes they're not extraterrestrial, but there's something else going on. This is another phenomenon which is presenting itself in this sort of highly advanced technological alien life form.
Interdimensional, sometimes they argue.
Yeah, it's appearing. It's taking on this appearance, right, of these alien beings that are highly advanced and far superior to us. But it's really something else. And he even links it back. He says it's the same phenomenon. If you take a historical sweep, you see that every culture, every civilization has had these experiences. Even if you look at cave art and cave drawings, paintings, thousands of years old in the deserts in Nevada, you see that there's depictions of beings and crafts and stuff like this. So something has definitely been going on historically. If you look at through the medieval period, he's got another book called Wonders in the Sky, and they trace it back, I think, over to antiquity, all the way back to antiquity. The people's reports and observations of phenomenon in the sky, and the patterns he notices, that it's the same. There's a phenomenon that appears to people. It takes on an appearance which is slightly more advanced than what's known at a current time in a certain period. So he's got reports of people in the medieval times seeing ships, flying ships, like ships that sailed the seas, but with lights and anchors. So again, something they knew and they could understand and they could reference based on the experience, but it was slightly more advanced than what they knew. So enough to create a state of awe in the person that this is greater than us. But obviously it wasn't so advanced that they couldn't understand it at all. In today's age, he's saying the same phenomenon is reappearing, but it's taking on the form of these highly advanced aliens with technology. And I mean, think about this, bro. And I thought about this a lot. You know, if we look at the history, take a religious perspective now, we know that the jinn have appeared to human beings throughout history, and they've taken on certain forms, and people have fell into their worship, right? The Arabs, even pre-Islamic Arabia, Arabs, when they would go into the desert, they would seek refuge in these jinn so they would be protected. You know, there was idols of jinn, you know, different religions. You know, over my studies over the past couple of years, I've looked at some of the other religions, and I believe personally that many of the other religions, you know, or some of them at least, were inspired by a shayateen, right? It's very interesting, the history of this. Now, you see them, they appeared in these figures and these forms that are like gods, and they, you know, I think Greek mythology is shayateen and jinn appearing in the form of these beings, which people take as gods, and they end up worshipping them. Why? Because look, you read the Quran, you see, shaitan's objective is to misguide human beings, take people away from the worship of Allah. You know, and he says this, he asks for time from Allah till the day of judgment, and then he says, I will try to misguide these people in any way I can, from in front of them, behind them, by the sides, every direction he will come to them. So we see this pattern amongst the jinn, or the evil of the jinn.
From above them.
Yeah.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, so we see this pattern, bro. You know,
literally from above us. We see this
pattern emerge. Yeah, literally, you know. And it's so we see the pattern amongst the jinn. They want to misguide humans. They appear in forms so people fall into their worship. If you want to lead people to the worship of a specific being in our age, in this techno-secular age today, that people that don't believe in God, what's the best way to do this? I think this is probably one of the best ways. Appear in the form of aliens, which are physical beings from other planets, because already the secular scientists already say there may be life out there. So they have this conception within their paradigm. Appear in this form, appear to have greater technology than what's present on Earth. I mean, look, what's going on, bro? If you look at the Americans, what are they freaking out about? You know, one of the main reasons they're having these congressional hearings is because they think it's a risk to national security for them, these objects flying through the sky. These objects are running circles around the best technology on the face of this earth right now. You know, the best fighter jets. What state is that going to leave them in? It leaves them in a state of awe. Like, wow, you know, because we prize technology today. You know, if you have technology, the greater your technology and power, the more you're revered in the world. Now, America is the superpower of the world, right? It has the greatest technology. Now, if their technology is being outdone by these objects, naturally, it's going to leave you in a state of awe. And then add that with some of these abduction experiences people have and report that these beings come to me and they tell me, you know, that we're going to take you to a better place. You can make the world a better place. You've got a job to do on this earth. You have an advent of a new religion. You know, you're going to submit to these beings. Now, is this tied in with potentially the Dajjal in the future? Allah knows best. But it's very interesting what's going on. You can analyze this topic from many different perspectives.
We know that it's not malak, right? It's not angels. We know that from an Islamic worldview that angels don't operate like this, that they don't come down and harass people with flying saucers and abductions and what have you. And that connection now of wahi and that whole process is now cut off after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That angels will not appear to people and these sorts of things will not happen. And if we look at this in a religious framework, if we were to accept, if we're not taking this as advanced drones or psyops or lights in the sky that the governments are doing to trick their people, and if we accept the linear path that this phenomenology has taken, you highlighted a very fascinating point that they appear to you slightly more advanced than your time, which would explain the ships in the sky phenomenon that you see in a lot of cultures where they see, big boats in the sky. And obviously, if we can have boats in the sea, and these people can have boats in the sky, you would have a reverence for these creatures or these higher beings. And here, I think the operative term is worship. Now, the viewer might be thinking that, nobody bows down to aliens or prostrates their head. Some of them do, by the way, some of these crazies, like with the religious rituals. But what is the operative term worship suggesting here? Is it an obedience? Is it a reverence for these beings? Is it a sort of,
yeah. I mean, we know near the end of times, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the advent of Dajjal, this is one perspective or speculation on this, and that people would follow him in the droves, Maybe this is the laying down the groundworks, preparing the techno-secular mind to open up to spirituality enough where if these beings now, I mean, if these beings were to come down and say, look, we created you, we seeded you on the earth, obey us. I think many people would obey them. I mean, they don't have a choice. I mean, if the American government is helpless against these beings, I mean, what are people going to do, right? So I think it may be laying down the foundations for the advent of Dajjal in the future. It may be just the fact that, it wants if the superpowers and the academics, because one of the things that's happening in the past year or two, we've seen many academics come forward and discuss this topic, not only write about it, but also share their own experiences. Gary Nolan, for example, you've probably heard of him, eminent biologist. He has his own labs and facilities and his, own businesses. He's, I think, in the running for the Nobel Prize as well. So he's a brilliant mind. He's even opened up and said, I've had experiences, throughout my life. So, and this is powerful from a social, sort of psychological perspective, because academics are revered in society, in today's society. They're taken seriously. It's academic ideas which sort of translate and come down into mainstream eventually, When academics are coming out and saying, I've had these experiences, these are powerful. And by the way, I think there's this new type of, if you like, intellectual eugenics taking place as well now, because him and others have suggested that people that have these experiences with these beings, they have certain parts of their brain that are more developed, and they are far more intelligent than the common folk. They're very intelligent people. So these ideas, bro, they're seeding in people's minds. Now, I mean, think about if someone watching this and listening to this, what are they thinking? Oh, intelligent people have experiences, so I should have experiences because I believe I'm an intelligent person. Most people want to believe they're intelligent people. So you can see these ideas that are being sort of drip-fed in society by academics now, to sort of lay the foundations for something. Exactly what's coming, Allah knows best. I don't know which way the government's going to go with this, if disclosure is going to happen. If it happens, what are they going to say? What story are they going to spin, or what narrative are they going to give? Allah knows best. But the reason I started looking into this topic, bro, was because I saw it was becoming very popular. A lot of people have reported experiences throughout history. The government's taking this seriously. Academics are taking this seriously now. And also they're bringing this question into play now. Oh, if alien life exists, what does this mean for world religions? Where does this leave world religions? So, I wanted to come at this from this angle. So I thought we need to have something in place from a dawah perspective, that we have the answers ready as and when this happens, disclosure happens, whatever the case is. And many people are asking about this now, the congressional hearings and the UAP topic. So we need an answer as Muslims. How do we explain this phenomenon? Right? This was my objective. How do we explain this? So it's not, a problem for us. So Muslims don't say, oh my God, aliens are here, or these beings are here, Islam is wrong. We don't want them to fall into this quickly, because many Muslims jump sometimes when it comes to this stuff. So there's two possibilities, right? From an Islamic perspective, the Christians had an issue with this, right? This is why the Christians, by the way, started writing about this since the 50s. If you look at the academic literature on this, the Christians have been writing about this, and the way they have interpreted this, they said this is demonic. These are demons. These are fallen angels, as they have in their tradition. Now, that's very interesting as well, because there's a group in the American government called the Collins Elite. Now, there's a very powerful group within the government called Collins Elite. They're a Christian group. And they have apparently studied this phenomenon, and they were the ones that told people like Lou Elizondo not to study this topic, right? And to read his Bible and to stay away from this topic. Long story short, I think they know what's going on, and they don't want people to touch it, because it's just too much for people to handle. But they had to refer to this as fallen angels or demons, because they couldn't, within their theology, at least at the time, couldn't sort of really easily fit in alien life. Although now they've made adjustments and they can sort of acknowledge alien life, I think, at least most of them. But Islamically, we don't have this problem, bro. Because in the Quran, you read the Quran, there are passages which you can interpret or understand as Allah referring to the fact that He's created life throughout the universe. He's scattered life throughout the heavens and the earth. So there could be life in other parts of the solar system, or other parts of the universe, not the solar system, but other parts of the universe, or in other galaxies. Allah knows best. So there is that possibility. So therefore, there's no pressure on us to interpret this phenomenon as jinn. Because we can say, okay, if aliens exist and there's proof of it, fine, no problem for Muslims. Khalas. Allah created us, Allah created them. Right? End of story. Sure, there may be some theological discussions and debates in regards to intelligence of alien life and where do they fit in within the whole sort of cosmology of Islam, but that's a separate discussion. Those could be had. However, when you look at the data, bro, and I did an essay on Sapiens Institute, I published an essay on this, an article on this, and I cover sort of 4 or 5 key areas of comparison between the phenomenon and the jinn. And when you compare the two phenomena, the phenomenon and the jinn, you see that there are some striking resemblances between the two. Almost they're identical, bro. Like, I am yet to come across something about the UFO phenomenon which can't be explained via the jinn phenomenon.
Please,
so I'll give you some examples.
Could you go through some examples? Yeah.
You have the appearance. Sorry, bro?
Could you go through some examples, like illustrative examples of this, where they're similar?
Yeah, I'll give you some examples. So let's take appearance. One of the areas I cover is appearance, or the presentation of this phenomenon. For example, the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith mentions that the jinn are of 3 kinds, or take on 3 forms. Those that fly through the sky, those that appear in the form of cats and dogs, and those that come and go. Right? So there are 3 types or manifestations of jinn. Those that fly through the sky. I mean, that when the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning that the UFO phenomenon, what's happening? These are things flying through the sky, predominantly through the sky. You know, some people see them on the ground, but objects, lights, orbs flying through the phenomenon, you study it, read the works of Jacques Vallée, John Keel, others. These things sometimes suddenly appear, manifest, and then disappear, right? Within a moment. It's not like they've traveled from point A to B, they just disappear, they vaporize, whatever the case is. The Prophet also said that those that appear in the forms of cats and dogs, meaning taking on physical forms. Now, what's very interesting is something you don't hear in the mainstream, but when you look at the literature, is that people that have UFO experiences, many of them have follow-up experiences. So, for example, there was one guy, Jim Simivan, he's an ex-CIA agent, and he spoke about this on YouTube, is that when he had when he started studying the topic, he started to have experiences. His family were haunted by these things. He would see shadow beings and figures in his room. Some people reported seeing dog-like, half dog, half man-like creatures appearing in their backyards. These are government officials talking about this stuff. There's another place called Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if you've heard about that. There was a popular documentary series on that as well, which was very funny and interesting to watch. But people that have gone to that ranch, and by the way, the American government spent millions of dollars actually studying that ranch, right? So people have gone on there. When people leave, they leave with something, and they call it the hitchhiker effect. They have a term for it. It's called the hitchhiker effect, meaning something follows them back, terrorizes this attachment phenomenon that takes place after a UFO experience for many people, many people. And it's very interesting. You won't hear about this on the news, but when you look at the academia and the books on this by the academics, you see this mentioned very clearly. You know, the jinn become attached to people. They follow people. They possess people. This is taking place. The non-Muslims are witnessing this. They just call it something else, attachment. Abduction is another one, bro. I'll give you this example. We know that the jinn are known to abduct. There are cases. So, for example, in the time of, I think it was Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was the emir, this woman came to him, and I'll just paraphrase, it's a very long narration, and she said to him that my husband's is gone, you know, can you invalidate the marriage? So he said, no, give it some time, and if not, then we'll, proceed in the way we need to. Long story short, the man disappears. Many years later, he returns, and he's looking for his family. And almost says, well, where were you? You disappeared. Your family was looking for you. You didn't tell them anything. He said, I was taken by the jinn. I was abducted by the jinn. And they kept me as a prisoner until another group of jinn, good jinn, or Muslim believing jinn came. They defeated them, and then they couldn't keep me as a captive because they were believers and I'm a believer. So they gave me an offer: you can stay with us or you can return back to your home. So he said, I'd return, and then they returned him back. Interestingly, was of note here is that Umar ibn al-Khattab accepted that explanation, right? Which means that this was a phenomenon that was known to take place. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned to keep the children in after dark so the jinn don't take them. At the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, if you read Ibn Taymiyyah's essays on the jinn, bro, very interesting. He talks about people being abducted from their homes, taken through the walls at night. You know, these lights being seen, and these lights taking people out of their homes, taking them to far, distant places in the sky, etc. So this abduction phenomenon is there, present within our tradition. The abduction phenomenon is one of the key aspects of the UFO phenomenon, bro. If you look at the cases, Betty and Barney Hill, a very famous case of abductions. There was an academic from Harvard. His name is not coming to me right now, but he was the head of psychiatry in Harvard. He wrote a book on abductions. John Mack, that was his name, John Mack. Very respected guy. And once he wrote the book, obviously he had a lot of criticism and backlash and all of this type of stuff. But he studied the abduction phenomenon. So he studied many, many cases. And remember, we're talking about this in a period before social media existed, right? So, and the conclusion he came to was that people are having independent experiences which have, correlations. And you can't deny this phenomenon. This is not mass hysteria. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew it wasn't mass hysteria. This was the head of psychiatry in Harvard, one of the top universities in the world. So there was something real to this abduction phenomenon, right? And it's going on even today. There's another guy who wrote the book called Communion. Again, his name's not coming to me. Very famous author. He's had experiences throughout his life. He's had negative experiences, bro. Like, these beings doing some horrendous things to him. But he wrote about it in his book. I mean, when you read these accounts and you read what we know about the jinn, it matches up, bro. There's many other things when you look at them side by side that is almost a clear correlation between the two. The only difference is the appearance that they're taking now, which is these aliens or these beings from other planets, all of this type of stuff. And this is what led me to conclude that what's being observed is actually the jinn. It's not extraterrestrials or aliens, it's actually jinn that are doing this. Exactly why, Allah knows best. We can speculate as to why this may be taking place. Maybe the US government has become more aware of it because of advancements in technology, bro. They've got sensors and cameras and they could pick up on this stuff, which is then, become a big thing now. Maybe there's something deeper going on, again, you can speculate, but we won't know the truth of that.
That begs the question of that there's always the element in the whole conspiracy theory is that intellectuals, academics, top leading scientists, the government, agencies, intelligence agencies, that they're in contact with these beings. And that there is an element of technology sharing where we show subservience to them and that they share technology with us. And then they go to the leading empire of the time, meaning the America or the West or whatever you want to call it, or Western governments. And that their obsession that the CIA and a lot of intelligence agencies had in the 50s and 60s with studying these phenomena, like you mentioned, Skinwalker Ranch, they bought it. I think John Lear is the guy who led the thing. He's the son of the Lear Jet Company guy. And he's also the one who introduced Bob Lazar to public radio and then brought his story out. He's this central character, very, very strange guy going around and sharing leaked documents and introducing people to these ideas. Do you think that element of that they might have changed the mode of operations, but the theme is still the same? We're higher beings. Back in the day, we're gods. You have to worship us. We're higher beings. In this day and age means we're aliens and we have better technology, and here's some technology. Do we have any
100%?
Do we have any framework or evidence to show that there's been an exchange of technology? Do we have any religious motivation to believe any of this? Any
there's passages, I can't remember exactly, there's passages in the Quran where the shayateen, on the day of judgment, those that have misled human beings, Allah speaks about them and they're working in coalition together. But what's very interesting, bro, is, again, let's take hundreds of years ago example. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions about a donkey, a man having a donkey, which would fly him to Hajj, right, or to do Umrah, right? This is in his essays. And then his son inherited this donkey, and his son, knew about this, so he got on the donkey and told him to fly him to Mecca. And the donkey refused, and he spoke to him, and the donkey said, "Your father used to pray 2 rak'ah to me first, and then I will take him to Mecca," right? Which sort of defeats the purpose in a way, because you're worshipping the donkey now, right? But so you see here, there's an exchange of goods for worship. Right, and we see this amongst magicians, bro. What do magicians do? In Pakistan, this is quite rampant, and many of them are frauds, but many of them do dabble with black magic and the jinn, etc. There's an exchange. You do something for the shayateen, and normally it's abhorrent stuff what these magicians do, bro, disgusting stuff, and they do something in return for you. We see this in examples in modern technological advancements too. A brilliant example is modern rocketry, bro. So, you had, again, the man's name's going on my head. One of the founding fathers of rocketry.
Jack Parsons.
Yes, Parsons. Yes. Modern rocketry. But what he used to do rituals in the desert. And by the way, he was a student of Aleister Crowley. direct student of Alistair, one of Alistair Crowley's proteges, one of his main students that he really sort of revered. He would go into the desert and do rituals to these different beings, right? So that he can get inspiration. And it's disgusting, but he even had certain relations with animals in his own family, like pets and his own mother, right? To appease these beings so they can give him these and he look at the technological, even today, bro, if you look at NASA, and D.W. Pasulka speaks about this, the symbolism in the badges that NASA has on these shuttles and the rituals that they do before a launch, they're still taking place, these rituals, bro. They're following in Parsons' footsteps, literally. So there's definitely something going on here, bro.
Used to have a dream or a vision of a being called Armilius Belial Dajjal. And and he used to say that the rocket fuel is going to launch, the space age will launch me into this world. It will allow me to enter into your plane. Now, this is like straight mainstream, like just knowledge about. And in the center of his courtyard in his house, he had a big giant statue of Baphomet, of like this like goat head man thing, and in the main courtyard. And he used to host, sexual orgies and these mass sort of sex magic rituals. Magic with the K, the British style of magic, which is the classic with the Crowley and the Red Dawn and these kind of cults that were very popular in the 18th and 19th century. The people argue that people like Aleister Crowley set off the 20th and 21st century, do what thou wilt, with his religion of Thelema, of do what thou wilt. That is the flavor of the day, the hedonism. The hedonism of just do it, like with Nike, that this new religion is about the worship of the self. Yani, if you look at it from the perspective of the shayateen, they would be equally as successful if they made them worship them, if they made you worship them, or if they made you worship yourself. Yani, both of these kinds of shirk would lead you to damnation, and they would have a. Sorry, we lost you there. The internet in Pakistan is abhorrent these days. But we were speaking specifically about the New Age religion of Thelema, which was Crowley's sort of religious tradition, which is all about the worship of the self, do what thou wilt, and all that. And that the shayateen would be equally as successful if they made you worship them or you worship yourself. It's the same kind of, it's all the same to them. What about the technology exchange element? There is have you ever seen those when they show circuitry and motherboards and hard disks, and it looks like demonic symbols?
Definitely. Yeah, it's strange, bro. Yeah, it is weird.
What do you think about the exchange of technology? Do you think that it's just a psyop or just like a religious flavor that they're adding?
No, so what I would say is this: many of the big figures that have led to the development of technology, such as rocketry and other aspects, many of them were known, if you look at their histories, to be engaging in the occult, in alchemy. They were engaging in these things, looking to make contact with these beings that the Greeks called daemons. So they were engaged in this type of stuff. Parsons is a brilliant example that we just spoke about, right? He was doing these rituals and worship and, looking to make contact with these beings. Crowley's whole objective was to make contact with these beings. And eventually he did. Lam, I think he was called, this being that he made contact, who looks like a typical alien that you see today, right? That, as is depicted, big head, big eyes, small face. So there's definitely influence, yes. As far as giving technology, maybe as well, because look, again, Jacques Vallée and other guys, they've speculated that, look, if there's aliens coming from another planet and they're so advanced that they're traveling millions of light years to come to Earth, then why would they have these, how could their technologies just suddenly fail and crash, in a desert? You'd expect them to have all of these things figured out. But obviously they're crashing, and sometimes these craft are just left there. It's almost like they haven't even crashed; they're just left there for people to take.
Yeah, they call them gifts. They call them gifts.
Yeah, gifts.
They call them gifts.
So and some have speculated that that's what's going on. That these are gifts. These are things that have been given, and therefore, because they know what humans are going to do naturally, they're going to pick it up and they're going to reverse engineer. I mean, from a political perspective, bro. Again, one of the things the American government is worried about is this foreign technology. Have they beaten us to this? Have they got something and reverse engineered it, China or Russia, and they've beaten us to it. That's what they're worried
So
about.
it might not be such a direct communication where you have the cartoonist sort of version of that, where like a man in a suit walks in and he tells you that he's the devil or whatever, and I'll give you something in exchange for something. But it might be more obtuse and slightly more where there's a desperation where because you hear about all of these things like oxygen deprivation tanks, psychedelics, that they're trying all of these methods in the 60s, right? To try to contact higher beings. You had that with the Nazi regime in Germany. You had that with the Americans. You had that with the British intelligence. Throughout the post-religion, the elites of Western society have been obsessed with the occult. They're obsessed with magic, trying to alchemy, trying to contact higher spiritual beings in different planes. And it seems that in the backdrop of this whole tradition of development and technology and science, there has been the religious motivation, but it's just not a conventional religion. Yani it's very open for interpretation. It's very individualized. It's very packaged for the individual dispositions of whoever is trying to. There's a lot to unpack still. We've already taken up a lot of time, and I don't want to take up more of your time for today, but I think that in the comments, people will let us know what they want to hear about this subject in detail, in particular aspects of it. Brother Imran has been very patient with the internet and our
may Allah bless you, bro. It's been good, man.
Services.
May Allah bless you. It's. I think one of the things I want people to take away from this, as interesting as these topics are, and I think you mentioned earlier that people could go down the rabbit hole of this stuff and lose themselves in this, and start coming out with, and it could easily happen, right? Is not to lose sight of the ultimate objective. The reason we're speaking about this, that I've been speaking about this, and by the way, I was discussing this with a few brothers for years, but we didn't do anything on it until recently, because we noticed, okay, now's the time we need to start talking about this because it's becoming so big. So there's an objective behind us talking about this stuff. Look, ultimately, alhamdulillah, we have Islam. It's the truth from Allah. It's the straight path. It's guidance. Everything else is crooked out there. And especially in the age we live in today, things are becoming more and more crooked and strange and weird and twisted and distorted and confusing, right? And they're going to become worse as time goes by. So Muslims need to ground themselves in the reality of Islam. And if anything, ground yourselves and then use these topics we're talking about, because they're so popular, in giving people dawah. Right? If they're interested in this topic, look, show them. Well, we have a concept of the jinn in Islam. What's interesting, there's a correlation between that and the phenomenon. Why don't you have a look at what Islam has to say in regards to this? That's a very powerful way of introducing people to Islam that are interested in this topic, right? Why not? Whatever brings them closer to the truth, inshallah, if that's what floats their boat, then show them that truth in Islam. There's answers in Islam for these things. So it's a very powerful talking point, I think, in the dawah going forward. Like I said in the beginning, bro, it's not going to be about atheism going forward or naturalism. Those are old news. Now we're moving to this new age confusion, right, of spiritualism and a mix and mash, which makes it more challenging for us. Because at least with atheism and naturalism, they were defined, some defined things and laws that you can observe and study and take apart. Now it's just a mix and mash of everything. So it's very challenging, but this is why it's even more important to stick to our roots and ground ourselves in Islam, so that we're not swayed by this nonsense that's coming out, and that we can understand it, articulate it, conceptualize it, and then give dawah through it as well to people, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, Brother Imran. You've been very patient with us. Inshallah, we'll hope to see you soon, not only on the show, but back home in Pakistan.
Inshallah, brother.
We'll be honored to host you and see you physically, inshallah. Thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, bro. Keep up the good work. May Allah bless you guys, man. MashaAllah.